Yeah, the same for me. It's like when I read Atlas Shrugged, I was like, you understand that there are like two mentalities that are always struggling in the world, right? The collectivist mentality and the individual mentality. And I think that that's the good thing about objectivist philosophy. It's going first to the root of why a philosophy is needed to live a life. And then you can go into the different subjects like economics, politics, academia, entrepreneurship. So for you, you've been working around, like, for example, this book, Equal is Unfair. You went to the subject of economics, social issues. Why do you think it's important to talk about inequality?
Well, I think even taking a step back, because I was never really even interested in politics at first. I mentioned that it was this idea of being pro-reason and interested in human greatness. That was really my primary motivation. And that's what made me so interested in philosophy. Because if you think about what philosophy is, it's whenever we're thinking, whenever we're talking, whenever we're acting, we're always making a bunch of assumptions. We're not even aware of those assumptions. Yeah. Like right now, I'm assuming that you understand the words that I'm saying. I assume that you and like the cameramen and the people doing construction outside this building that we might be able to hear, that, you know, these people aren't going to like jump me and rob me or something. There's all of these assumptions. And what philosophy does is it identifies our deepest assumptions and allows us to raise those to the surface and really think critically about them so that we have the greatest amount of control over our minds as possible. And so what I always want to do is like help people gain the power of philosophy so that they can live the greatest life that they can, and they have the full power of reason, which only comes from raising those issues to the surface. And what that does is it allows you to clarify every part of the world, including policy issues, including contentious economic debates, because ultimately those are based on certain moral views. They're based on certain views of the world. And so if you take the inequality debate, I think part of what attracted me to it is precisely because I was always interested in human beings at their best. And what I think is ultimately going on in inequality debate is that there's people who view human beings at their best and want to cut them down, who view that as something that they resent and envy, and so they will concoct entire moral, political, philosophic systems in order to attack. Now, I say that, let me add though, there's many people who are concerned with inequality for perfectly good reasons. And what I try to argue in the book, what Yaron and I try to argue, is that if you're really, the genuine concerns that people have are not inequality problems. They're a very different kind of problem.
And that is something that I want to really tackle on, because the debate about inequality, it's about material inequality. The way I understand that, for what I see, is that people say, okay, there is this 1% of the population who has huge amounts of wealth compared to the rest of the 99. The assumption behind, if we apply philosophy, is if just everyone in the planet would have the same equal amount of stuff, then we wouldn't have, villains or robberies or unethical behavior in the world, right? For me, when I look at this logic from the outside, it's like what they're saying is, if we only have the same list of stuff, and everyone in the planet has the same amount of, I don't know what the magical list includes, right? It's like a Santa Claus letter from a kid. But let's assume that it's, helicopters and jets and houses and cell phones. I don't know what the magical list should be, but it seems to me that it's like, okay, if the 7 billion people in the world would have that, then we will all be ethical. It's all about material stuff. But when we look at the experiments where equality has been put into place, material equality, Soviet Union or Mao's China or Cuba or Venezuela, what ends up happening is that in order to have equality, you distribute equally, and it's never equally, right? Like only the oligarchs that are near Stalin or Fidel Castro or Mao get more stuff. For the rest of the people, it's not. But let's assume they split everything equally. But in that moment, they kill innovation. So there is not more new stuff coming in that country. That's why, for example, La Habana, Cuba, looks like a postcard from the 1950s. Because in the moment that you implement equality, material equality, you immediately kill innovation for new ideas, for new products to come to that society. So instead of bringing that ethical behavior, people start behaving more like villains. And corruption is enforced and it's even applauded, whereas honesty and good behavior are not. So it seems to me that the equality that no one talks about and that we should talk about is inequality of the law. The fact that rule of law is not applied equally to everyone in the society.
So one way to think about it is that there's no such thing as being for equality. Okay. Like if somebody says, I'm for equality, because there's different conceptions of equality that conflict. And I think you're highlighting the fundamental one. You can have equality of outcome or equality of condition, or you can have equality, political equality, or equality before the law. One of them is the government treats everybody the same, and then whatever outcomes we get going about our lives as free individuals, those are the outcomes we get. Mm-hmm. Or it's that the government treats us all differently in order to equalize us. Because think about it, if you're trying to make people equal in their outcomes, what do you have to do? Well, if somebody's really smart and really productive and is willing to go into a very challenging field and become like Mike Trout, the best baseball player, they're going to become like Steve Jobs, one of the best business people. Yeah. They are going to, by that very nature, if they're left free, earn a lot of money. More than even take somebody who's perfectly moral, perfectly productive, but like a teacher. My wife was a teacher for a while, and I have a lot of respect for teachers, but you're providing economic value to maybe a dozen, 24 people at a time. You're going to achieve really wildly different results. And so what is the only way to equalize? It's to penalize people who create more value, right, and it's to reward people for the less value that they create. You have to treat them differently. And so we have to make a choice. Like, do you think the government should treat everybody the same, or do you think the government should penalize people for their virtues and reward people for their failures in order to make people more equal? And I think when you face that kind of question, then you think, well, what model of reality could possibly make people choose the equalized one? Because there's something inherently, at least on the face of it, unfair about penalizing people sheerly for their virtues. And I think the model comes down to that they view wealth as this given. The universe, nature, society hands us this fixed amount of wealth. Yeah. And then if some people get more, others have to get less. And then you think, well, why? So then they'll ask, well, why should people get more? Why do they deserve more? And then they'll say, well, you might say that person works harder. You might say that person has a rare set of skills, but those are things that are lucky. Those are outside of his or her control. Right. And so they have a view that says we have this fixed amount of wealth, so one person's gain is another person's loss. And then they have the view that says everything's a matter of luck. Elizabeth Warren, who's now running for president, became famous for this rant that she went on that Obama later would ape as the "you didn't build that" idea. It's the idea that nobody gets rich in their own, nobody is successful through their own individual achievements and choices, and therefore there's nothing wrong about penalizing people for their superior earning because they didn't really earn it. It was an accident of fate. It was a gift from society. And so given that nobody really earns anything, and given that one person's gain is one person's loss, morally we should equalize. But the problem is that whole model is wrong, because what it leaves out is that production is something individuals achieve through their own choices. No, we don't do it all quite on our own as if we're waving a magic wand. Something that is under our control doesn't mean that we create every last aspect about it. It's that we make choices in a certain context, and you can make better or worse choices. And the kind of people who create and succeed are making good choices in the face of good and bad luck. And the people who fail are, by and large, people who are not making those choices.